If I asked you to picture someone with an extremely high IQ, you'd probably say something like lab coat, quiet confidence, maybe glasses for good measure. Maybe they speak in perfectly formed sentences and never second-guess themselves. The kind of person who walks into a room and everybody just knows they're the smartest one there. And the uncomfortable truth is that image is almost entirely wrong. The people who score in the top fraction of a percent don't walk around feeling like geniuses. Most of them spend an embarrassing amount of time convinced they're frauds. They stay up until 3 a.m. not because they're working on something brilliant. Sometimes they're just awake, catastrophically, uselessly awake, thinking about something they said in 2009 that probably nobody else even remembers. They talk to themselves. They forget where they put things constantly. And when you study their psychology up close, it's a lot more chaotic and human. So if any of this is already sounding somewhat familiar, great. Let's dive into the 7 weird habits that they might possess. And let me know in the comments if any of these stick out for you or someone you know. 1. The single most consistent pattern is self-doubt. They doubt themselves more than almost anyone around them. They genuinely believe they are less capable than they actually are. Research shows higher performers underestimate their standing, while lower performers overestimate theirs. The more deeply someone understands a domain, the more clearly they can see its full complexity, and therefore all the ways they're still falling short. The person who barely understands something tends to feel surprisingly confident because they don't see the gaps yet. But the person who understands it deeply sees every nuance, every exception, every potential mistake. What this produces is a kind of permanent low-level anxiety that they're somehow getting away with something, that people have overestimated them, that eventually someone's going to figure it out and expose the fraud. And the smarter they are, the more elaborate the internal case they can build against themselves. Because that same cognitive machinery that makes them excellent at complex reasoning is equally great at constructing detailed, convincing reasons why they're not good enough. It's almost funny when you step back. The person most qualified to be in the room is often the one most convinced they shouldn't be there, sitting quietly, wondering if today is the day everyone finds out. 2. High IQ individuals are disproportionately likely to be night owls. And this isn't just a lifestyle preference. It appears to be research found that people with higher measured intelligence consistently went to bed later and woke up later than their lower IQ counterparts, even after controlling for job schedules and social obligations. The researchers framed it through an evolutionary lens, the capacity to override your circadian rhythm for abstract, self-chosen reasons, like reading late into the night, thinking deeply, or creating something as a relatively recent human behavior, and it shows up more strongly in people with higher general intelligence. What this means in practice is that a lot of very smart people are chronically slightly dysregulated and operating in a world built around a morning schedule. They might drag themselves to early meetings feeling foggy, while their mind only really lights up after midnight. This often comes across as lazy or undisciplined to others, but their hardware just ticks differently. Their brains seem wired to thrive in those quiet, late hours, when the world slows down. 3. They talk to themselves, out loud, more than they'd probably admit at a dinner party, and this one actually has solid research behind it. Private speech. The technical term for self-directed verbal thought is well documented as a tool for cognitive and executive function. Saying something out loud genuinely helps the brain process it differently than just thinking it silently. It adds a layer of clarity and structure. What we observe in many high IQ individuals is a strong tendency to use language as a primary tool for thinking, not just for communicating with others. When there's nobody around to talk to, the conversation still has real utility for sorting through ideas. So, they have it anyway. The social side effect is that they sometimes get caught doing it in a grocery store aisle or a parking garage and have to very quickly pretend they were on the phone. It can feel a little awkward in the moment, but for their mind, it's just how thinking gets done. 4. This one isn't contemplated enough, but people with very high IQs are significantly more prone to anxiety and rumination than the general population. Research shows a genuine link between high verbal intelligence and elevated worry. The hypothesis is that the same capacity for predictive thinking that makes someone analytically gifted also makes them extremely good at imagining everything that could possibly go wrong, and then running detailed simulations of those scenarios. Your brain is, among other things, a threat detection machine. So, a more powerful brain doesn't necessarily mean a calmer one. Sometimes it means a faster, more thorough threat detector that can generate detailed disaster scenarios you hadn't even considered yet at remarkable speed. High IQ individuals tend to be anxious because their brains are constantly running these simulations, and some of those simulations can be genuinely terrifying. It's not weakness. It's the downside of having a mind that sees possibilities others miss. 5. They forget things mundane, ordinary, embarrassing things. Like where they put their keys, whether they replied to that text, or maybe the name of someone they've met 4 times already. This drives the people around them insane. It also drives them insane. Now, this one is more of an observed pattern than a hard research finding. But the explanation that makes the most sense cognitively is prioritization. A mind heavily invested in complex, abstract thinking appears to allocate less attention to low-stakes, repetitive information. The keys always end up somewhere. So, something else, a problem, an idea, a connection, felt more urgent in that moment. This doesn't make it less frustrating when it happens, but it does explain why someone who can mentally model a 15-step complex problem sometimes cannot remember if they turned the stove off or sent that important email. 6. They tend to have a broader and more expressive vocabulary, including the parts of it that would make your grandmother cover her ears. A study found that people who are comfortable using taboo language actually score higher on verbal intelligence tests, not lower. So the people cussing the most aren't always doing it because they've run out of better words. Not always. But occasionally they're doing it because they understand language well enough to know exactly which word fits the emotional or precise moment best. And perhaps that word happens to be a 4-letter one. To them, words are tools. And a good craftsman uses whatever tool gets the job done efficiently and effectively. Right? Language isn't just for politeness. It's for accuracy and impact. And finally, number 7. Sensory overload. People with very high IQs are disproportionately likely to experience the world as too loud, too bright, just too much. And this isn't hypersensitivity as a character flaw or something to push through. Research has found associations between high cognitive ability and heightened sensory processing sensitivity, meaning the brain that takes in more information analytically may also, quite literally, take in more sensory input than average. Crowded restaurants become genuinely overwhelming in a way they aren't for other people. The noise, the lights, the overlapping conversations all hit harder. Certain textures, sounds, or lighting conditions register as intrusive, rather than simple background noise. The same mental bandwidth that processes complexity deeply also processes the everyday environment deeply. And sometimes the environment is simply a lot to handle. This is one reason why many high IQ individuals strongly prefer controlled, quiet, low-stimulation spaces to work or relax. Not as a personality quirk, but because their nervous systems are operating under a heavier load than most people realize. What all of this adds up to is a picture that looks less like a superhero and more like a person who is quietly exhausted by their own mind, brilliant in ways that are real and sometimes remarkable, and also anxious, self-doubting, scattered, nocturnal, occasionally talking to themselves, and genuinely startled by how loud that one restaurant was or how bright the lights felt. If you recognize yourself in this, in the doubt, the 3 a.m. wakefulness, the emotional weight of a brain that won't stop running simulations and noticing everything that recognition matters, not because intelligence makes suffering more valid, but because a lot of people who carry this particular profile spend their whole lives being told they have every advantage, wondering why it still feels so hard sometimes. Now you know some of the reasons why. Understanding these patterns can be the first step toward being kinder to yourself. If you're interested in exploring some of my explanations further, I've put together a collection of books that dive deeper into psychology, human behavior, and independent thinking. You can find the full list on my bookshop page through the link in the description and pinned comment. And if you enjoy content like this, Consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss future uploads.